Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack here. It is now Wednesday, the 8th of January, 2025. Pretty important update for you today. Fire and Ice is the thumbnail title. Going to go over the best I can as to why we have seen the truly catastrophic, horrific, nightmarish fire situation in the LA Basin region. Got a good infographic that I'm going to share from someone else to kind of explain it, because I do think it needs some explanation. These things don't just happen. The setup was there, and how I find it to be very similar in terms of the messaging and the fact that we could see this coming a few days in advance. And it reminds me a little bit about what happened in western North Carolina with the flooding in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. And then, of course, the ice part of this, we have been dealing with quite the winter weather scenario since the year began, and that's going to continue. And we're going to get some snow and ice across parts of the South where they are not entirely used to it, and that, of course, is going to come with all kinds of chaos and mayhem. All right, so there you go. And then, of course, we'll talk a little tropics before things are all said and done, but we're not going to spend too much time on that today, because these two topics here are quite a bit more important. So just looking through my Twitter, wow, I mean, it is, Robert Ray, my friend at Fox Weather, he's headed out there. These scenes, Hollywood itself could not do, and that's the irony here as to where this is happening, couldn't do anything. This is real. This isn't CGI. It's not AI. It's not a Hollywood blockbuster. It is devastation and a terrible situation. And so most of even the algorithm side of Twitter is filled with these terrible images. So I do want to talk about why this has happened. Here's another example of it. So I've been following Colin here for quite a while. I say a while, the last couple of years, and in social media time, that's quite a while. Very insightful, great information that I have gleaned from Colin. That's why he's got 147,000 followers just on the Twitter here. Probably YouTube's also substantial. Colin does these updates on YouTube as well. And he saw this coming. There's a few other people that I look at out west that saw this coming in recent days. And as Colin says here, the worst fears have come true over the last 24 hours. Two of the worst wildfires in LA's history have turned into full-fledged urban firestorms. That's just frightening in and of itself. It really, really is. So why did this happen? This is why I do appreciate the algorithm side of social media sometimes. Sometimes you get garbage, but then you just mute it. You just, whatever. But sometimes you appreciate it, and it can really enlighten you. And I found this really good post here from Sam. Who is Sam? I thought I'd at least point out, well, Sam's going to be in meteorology. So Sam knows what I'm assuming it's a he, Sam could also be a she, is talking about. So I figured I would show you this. This is a really good infographic, very simple, and it has to do with, we're going to come back to this real quick, it has to do with this pressure gradient. You got the high pressure, this is yesterday's GFS just for reference. You had the high pressure up here over the Intermountain West, and the surface low over near the Gulf of California, the Baja region, and that squeeze play between the two in here, the gradient was set up just right that we have this just terrible situation here. So let's look at the infographic. The northeast winds don't have enough kinetic energy to lift the air over the mountains, so the flow is blocked and forced to divert around the barrier. As you do have the mountains down here in Southern California. I was out here a couple of years ago for Hurricane Hillary. That is farther down towards and to the east near Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley, of course. But down in the LA area and all throughout that region, you got the valleys, you got these mountains. So then that diverted airflow impinges on the mountains to the northeast of Los Angeles, exciting high-amplitude gravity waves that enhance the wind further on the downslope side. So the wind, you got to look at the atmosphere. It's very simple. It's a fluid. You just go like this and move your hands around. You can feel the air moving against your fingers and your hands. That's because the atmosphere is a fluid. It's just not dense like water. Therefore, we can breathe and we can survive. But denser H2O, for example, is where ocean life lives, and that's a much denser fluid. Our atmosphere, nevertheless, is a fluid, and so it does certain things reacting very much like fluids. If you dumped a bunch of water out over a plain and you had different boulders or other obstacles in the way, the water will go around and through things, and the atmosphere does very similar stuff when mountains are in the way. And all of this flow coming around gets diverted, and then it gets through these different passes, it gets squeezed, you get these gravity waves where it looks like bumps in the atmosphere, so you get these rolling pushes of pretty violent downsloping air, and as that air is coming south, or down, not south, so it does come south, it's also compressing and warming like a bicycle pump. So downsloping air warms, it's compressed, it warms, it dries out. That's a key element of this, so your dew points, your relative humidities are all very low. The air is also warm. And then finally, the third bullet point that Sam has made here, the gravity wave enhanced flow, is further accelerated, and this is what I was talking about, through those narrow mountain gaps. And in this particular situation, most notably, northwest of Los Angeles. And it was just one of those situations where everything came up, all sevens, so to speak, in a bad way. And we had this terrible situation unfolding, still happening even as I speak. But this is a great example, a good little diagram here. You can check it out as I've been talking. And there are others that have posted good information about this as well. And certainly National Weather Service LA probably has some great info. But this will go down in history as one of the worst fire disasters in the United States in terms of property damage. Unfortunately, there is loss of life. And, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing and a lot of blame to go around. It'll get politicized. You know how that goes. But the bottom line, people are affected, and it is devastating. So I thought I would lead off with that, some of the science behind why this has happened. So again, the GFS from yesterday really outlining that big high pressure. You move any one of these in a different area, these are like chess pieces, and it doesn't happen, at least not to the extent that we saw. This was just the perfect setup, very similar to what happened when we had the extreme rains in western North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, northern Georgia. We had a front that came through, a stalled frontal boundary a couple days before, Helene, that dumped a lot of rain across this region, and then Helene made landfall up in the Big Bend, and all the moisture got up here and dumped 20 to 30 inches of rain on those ridges. And here's the similarity. This is where I think it's really interesting and quite eerie. Both of these events were well spoken of days in advance. If you live in the southwest United States, Southern California, there were plenty of people talking about this on your television, on your social media out there. I picked up on it in the algorithm side, like I said, and even Colin, who I followed there out in California. I saw this. I saw it coming. Oh, wow, this is going to be really interesting, even while I was out there in Kansas covering the winter storm. And it's similar because Helene was also well advertised. Weather Service, national, local media outlets. But the Helene situation was much larger. This, even though it's a huge population area, LA, much larger population than all of Appalachia probably, it just didn't have the national scope of the forecast that Helene did, because Helene was going to affect a much larger geographic area. But they are similar in that both were well advertised in the guidance, and this is the sad part, it didn't matter. There's just not much we can do. We didn't know where the fires were going to break out, sure, but the fact that the Santa Ana winds, how extreme they were going to be, that was all well forecast. And then we knew that any fires that started could end up being like this. What do? You cannot evacuate the whole of the LA basin, just like you could not have evacuated the whole of southern Appalachia ahead of Helene. Messaging, it only goes so far, and there's really not a point to this more than just it's a sad and tragic day once again that the weather is working against us, and we're going to have to take the loss, unfortunately. I mean, just sometimes just this is the way it is. Can't sugarcoat it. All right, so the ice part. Now we got to deal with something else that has been well advertised for days. Pretty significant winter storm across the I-20 corridor, we'll just call it that. Dallas-Fort Worth, the Metroplex, was just there coming back from the Kansas blizzard that I covered. And yeah, they're going to get ice and snow, and there's going to be all kinds of traffic problems. DFW is going to have issues. This will affect air travel around the country. A major, major headache coming up even though it is not going to be a substantial, big-time, blockbuster 5, 10, 15 inches of snow. You don't need that in some of these areas to cause significant problems. So the winter storm warnings are the areas in pink here. Winter storm watches elsewhere starting to spread into western North Carolina. And then the cold air definitely locked in for quite a while. And these storms are going to be kind of one after the other over the next several weeks. We'll get a couple breaks in between. But no major blockbuster. You remember that GFS from the other day wound this thing up, and it was just this monster storm for the Northeast. That is not going to happen. We can confidently say that now. That being said, though, still a pretty significant storm system that's going to impact this region over the coming days, and that will have widespread impacts, again, to travel especially, and especially air travel as we go forward. Speaking of western North Carolina, this is the outlook for Asheville. I'm going to head up there tomorrow evening. I want to see my son play basketball in his middle school. I'm family as much first as I can, especially when it's not hurricane season. Hurricanes are a little different. I mean, funerals and weddings, got to make those, of course. Macabre, isn't it? I know. But, you know, the winter stuff, off season, I try to make sure I met my kids' stuff as much as I can. So after tomorrow night's game wraps up around 6:30, I'll make the 6-hour drive. Hey, look, at least I'll get there about 1 a.m. because Asheville probably going to see some snow Friday, and it'll be the first time that I've been back since what happened. Speaking of Helene, my parents used to live in Spruce Pine, Bakersville area for about 30 years. They are no longer with us, unfortunately, but they lived up there. I know that area very well, and I'm going to get to visit Spruce Pine and Bakersville probably later in the day, Friday and into Saturday. All of that will be part of this coverage that I will be doing. So, yes, Asheville literally on the radar for me because some wintry precipitation is headed their way. And there's still people up there, obviously, dealing with the aftermath quite uncomfortably of Helene. And I will see that firsthand. It's going to be hard because I know that area so well. And speaking of sports, I've been up here for a few soccer tournaments when my son plays his travel league soccer. We went to 3 of them last year in these same areas that were blasted out by that terrible flooding on September 28th of last year. So the modeling, let's look at the modeling again. The caveat here, the reminder, you got your operationals, and there's lots of those, and then you've got your ensembles, and we could sit here for an hour, maybe 2 hours, and go over all the models, and you would just be bored. Hopefully you're not already bored, but you get the idea. So we'd just like to look at a snapshot real quick, GFS operational. Again, just the caveat, the standard disclaimer applies. Yes, I'm very aware that there are all kinds of other versions of different models, the ensembles and so forth. But at least for the next few days, 3 to 5 days, one operational model usually does a pretty good job, and the GFS is the most easily accessible through tidbits here. So that's what I use. So this is the current setup, 12Z today. And out west, you got the high pressure still sitting up here. Those strong winds still coming through, those mountain passes. It's still terrible out there in Southern California. So let's see when that starts to abate. We'll move the map forward into the future. And all that energy starts to move its way out. Finally, the things will slacken off, especially as the low pressure leaves the Baja. And then the mayhem begins. The Metroplex down towards some of the hill country region of Texas. Cold, shallow, high pressure in place. You're going to have overrunning, so sleet, freezing rain, some snow where the air column is cold enough throughout. And then all of that starts to move its way with this mid-latitude coastal storm along the Gulf Coast. Coastal storms exist on the Gulf Coast, of course. And look at all that snow in areas where you're not used to it. It's not common. And then we could really have some big problems here. Charlotte, talk about a big airport. And then Columbia down here. My friend Scott that helped out, one of our supporters of our project, went with me to Kansas. All this area through here, this mixed precipitation, yuck, snow, ice, sleet, rain, whatever. Just a mixed bag, as they call it. That's Friday into Saturday, and then that moves into the mid-Atlantic. And then the jet stream and the southern stream do not phase, and so we do not get this mega storm this time around. We're at day 5. We'll leave it at that. Another system starts to drop out of Canada through the lakes with more cold air. You can see the outline of the high pressure. And it literally is a big dome. Let me just look at this. Huge area of high pressure. These chunks of air come out of Canada. I'll draw the H in there. It didn't quite make it. But that's the center of the high right there. That's however these maps render out, right? But winter's going to reload and keep doing what it's doing. Let's look at this from the 500 millibar field. And that's the height anomaly. Sorry, I just want to show you the regular. There it is. That eastern trough's just going to keep going and reloading time after time, as you can see there, taking this far out into the future, I know. But yeah, we're stuck into it, and I want to show you that because of what John Homanek is saying here. The next big storm, possibly, January 18th to the 21st. Really remarkable that we can see this in the guidance. John's one of the best out there, him and Eric Webb. There are those that really know how to pick this stuff up. So that's why I follow them. That's why I like to point them out to you. They're not perfect, but they do a really good job. Better than me, that's for sure. I'm more hurricanes, you know that. But I know how to follow weather maps and what meteorologists do say. And it looks like this trough, you can see the amplification of it there. This is out in time, several days out, 258. So yeah, more than 10 days. But that's a big signal. And these bigger signals are easier to pick up on than the synoptic scale storm systems. But the ensembles, I said there's lots of different models. The ENS, that means ensembles, painting a rather wet picture here. Southern stream energy. Now we just need to get that northern stream polar air involved, and then they can mix over here. And if you like winter weather, we just might have it once again as we get towards the last third of the month. Stuff related to the tropics, real quick for you. I saw this post from Ben Knoll. ECMWF, that's the Euro, the seasonal guidance, shows the La Nina-like pattern quickly reversing in early 2025 and an El Nino-like signal developing toward the middle of the year. This will have consequences on Atlantic hurricane season and global temperatures and moisture trends. I said to Ben, I replied, and you can see my tweet right down there, figured it was about time to see the annual ECMWF Goes El Nino guidance. It seems to do this every single year. Just something about it. I mean, most of the other guidance is not suggesting this. The pressure pattern that we're currently seeing in the Pacific does not suggest this. The cold pool is pretty substantial. I'll believe it when I see it. I think at best or worst, whichever way you want to call it, or at most, warm neutral, I could buy that. But an El Nino, that's very, very hard to do. After we just had one in 2023, then we went to La Nina. You usually don't go. History is a good guide here. You usually do not go back to El Nino this soon after having one with a La Nina in between. No, we are not officially in La Nina, but you understand, I think. All right, so we'll watch this. This will be really interesting. And to my point, I mean, we are clearly in that La Nina type pattern. Look, it can change quickly, but the ECMWF, as Ben said, quickly transitioning it. I don't think so. Just looking at the Hofmoeller diagrams, this right here is all easterly wind throughout the tropical Pacific. Kind of slid to the west a little bit here, but still, we're not seeing, this is the forecast in the future through here. Easterlies all through here. That's what all that blue means. And until that changes and we see some of those oranges and reds over in this area of this diagram, then I don't see El Nino even having a chance. Now, this only gets us through the 23rd of January. I realize that. But there's just not much precedence that suggests that we could go El Nino, La Nina, El Nino. I just don't see that happening. But we'll see. All right, one last thing before I let you go. The latest edition of our Hurricane Highway series is now available. The Hurricane Highway Season 2, Episode 9, Zeta. So be sure to check that out. It is on YouTube, publicly available. Gradually working my way through 2020 still. Yes, filmmaking is a long and arduous process. I'm the one that likes to do it. I'm the one that does it by myself. That's fine. It just means it takes a long time to put these together. But when they are done, they are done. And as you can see, look, there's Zach Friedel. I saw him in there for a second. You know, Zach and my good friend Greg Nordstrom's in here a few times. And Derek Thompson. A whole cast. There's Greg. There he was for a second. Anyway, you guys watch it. I don't need to show you those little frames on the video. You can watch it yourselves. Fire and ice. I'm telling you, you folks in Southern California, hang in there. It is, I mean, wow. I'm going to go back and look at some of the news coming out of there after I wrap this video up. And Robert Ray, by the way, from Fox Weather is headed out there. That's what his tweet was talking about earlier. He is headed to L.A. to report on it, and that'll be an unfolding story over the coming days and even weeks, obviously. And then like I said, tomorrow, after my son's game, I'll be headed up to Asheville. So all day Friday, I'll be in Western North Carolina reporting on the ice part in that area, also devastated by a big disaster from the flooding back in September. It just goes on and on and on, doesn't it? The weather never ceases to be interesting. Hey, look, thanks for tuning in and giving me a part of your day. I appreciate it very much. Don't forget, please help the algorithm by liking the video, share them with friends and family, and for goodness sakes, subscribe to the channel. Why wouldn't you? Hopefully you like the content. We want to keep feeding you more. And when you do and you subscribe, you'll be notified and you can tune in and see what we're up to. Have a good rest of your Wednesday. I'll see you next from Asheville on Friday.